Welcome to Travel Italia, the show about travel in Italy. Hi everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm Catherine, your host, and for those of you who are first-time listeners, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Let me introduce myself. I'm an American expat who's lived in Italy for half a decade, and on this podcast, I strive to share relevant, useful information and tips to help you plan your trip to Italy. I just want to highlight that I've learned about travel and life in Italy not from reading books or watching YouTube or scrolling through TikTok or some kind of social media, nor am I someone who has visited Italy a handful of times and has declared myself to be an expert. What I share with you on this show comes from firsthand experience in years of living and traveling through Italy. I speak fluent Italian, and despite this country's quirks, I love it, and I've chosen to make Italy my home. So now that you know a little bit about me, let's talk about today's show. I'm addressing a question that confuses so many of you when you're dining in Italy. Today's question is, do I need to tip at restaurants in Italy? Well, if you're a fellow American, you live in an over-tipping culture. Not only do you tip at restaurants, but nowadays in the US, if anyone hands you food you've already paid for, you're expected to tip in places like coffee shops, fast food restaurants, and everywhere in between. So you'll be happy to know that over-tipping doesn't exist in Italy. In fact, no tipping is necessary at all. That's right, you heard correctly. You do not need to tip in Italy. Let me explain why that is and how it works. When you dine at a sit-down restaurant where you are served by a waiter or waitress, there is a service fee per person added to your bill. This fee is called a Coperto, which is spelled Coperto. This fee pays for the staff, it covers the cost of their salaries. The Coperto is a flat fee and can vary on average between €1 to €5 a person, depending on where you're eating. In general, if you're eating in a popular touristy area near famous landmarks or popular places, you're going to pay more for a meal and have a higher Coperto. So, for example, if you decide to eat at a restaurant in St. Mark's Square in Venice, you're going to pay a much higher Coperto. This square probably has the most inflated prices in the whole country. Whereas if you choose to eat at a restaurant a few blocks away, you're going to pay a much lower Coperto and just in general much less for your meal. I'll share a true story about an experience that I had in St. Mark's Square in Venice. If you've ever been there, you know it's one of the most iconic places in Venice. It is the most iconic place in Venice. Now, it's called St. Mark's Square because the Basilica of San Marco, St. Mark, is located in this beautiful piazza. It's the heart of Venice, and this stunning piazza faces the basilica and the waterfront. There are cafes and restaurants that line the piazza, and in the evenings, in good weather, these cafes have live music. So it's a beautiful, magical atmosphere. A few years back, I was in Venice with a friend and was waiting for my friend to arrive. It was in the evening, so I thought I would treat myself to a glass of wine at one of these cafes in beautiful Piazza San Marco. Now, I knew full well that I was going to pay more than usual for the glass of wine, But what I didn't expect was a Coperto to sit down and enjoy a glass of wine. Because if you go to a cafe for a coffee or a glass of wine, it's almost unheard of to pay a Coperto. You usually just pay a Coperto if you're having a meal. So I sat down and I noticed right away that there was a €6 Coperto, which €6 is pretty scandalously high. So I asked the waiter if that applied to me as I was just having a glass of wine, and he said yes. So between the inflated cost of the wine and the Coperto, I was going to pay about €20 for a glass of wine, which in Italy is ridiculous. The average cost of a glass of wine is 3, max €10. So I politely declined and walked over to a sandwich shop where I paid €3 for a glass of wine and still enjoyed the view. Now I could afford the €20 glass of wine, but what I wasn't okay with was paying a €6 Coperto for a glass of wine. So I share this with you just to give you an example of how elevated prices are in high traffic tourist areas. Now, by law, the amount of the Coperto needs to be printed on the menu. It's usually at the bottom of the menu. So, for example, if you're a party of 4 and the Coperto is €3, then €12 will be added to your bill. I don't want to insult your intelligence by doing the math for you, but I just want to make it very clear because in other countries like the US, we are unfortunately used to paying percentages plus tax. So your final bill is a bit of a mystery. But not so in Italy. Tax is included into the price of your bill. There's no added tax. And then your Coperto is added to the bill. So whatever you see as the final amount is the final amount. No surprises. It's very straightforward. Now, having just explained that there's no need to tip at a restaurant, you can tip if you want to, obviously, but it's not necessary. Maybe if you're an American, you feel a pang of guilt because maybe the waitress was very kind, the food was good, and you received excellent service. So in that case, if you really want to leave a tip, then by all means, leave a tip. But really, there's no need to leave a 15 to 20% tip, 15 to 20% of the total bill, as is normal in the US. So a few euros is fine, and maybe a bit more in a nicer restaurant, or if you are dining with a large party of people, a big group of people. I also want to make clear that you don't need to tip at coffee shops, which are called bars in Italian, by the way. They aren't called cafes or coffee shops, they are called bars. Or at sandwich shops, gelato shops, or any other kind of establishment that offers takeaway food. And there's no Coperto added to your bill either. I do want to point out that in some bars and cafes, especially in touristy areas, there will be a difference in price if you choose to sit down. For example, if you order an espresso and stand at the bar to drink it, as many Italians do, you will pay on average €1 to €1.50. But if you decide to sit down at the table and be served, it'll cost you more. So you may pay €2 to €5 for that same espresso, depending on where you are. Not every bar or cafe increases prices with table service. Like I said, it's usually places that are in high traffic, touristy areas, near monuments, near very iconic piazzas. So there you have it, folks. There is no need to tip while you're dining in Italy. It's not required, it's not expected, it's not needed. But like I said, of course, if you feel guilt or you feel the need to tip, then go right ahead, but not 10 to 15 or 20%. I hope this has been helpful to you as you're thinking and planning about your trip to Italy. If it has been, please like the show, share the show, review the show, leave a kind review would be so, so helpful for me. Thank you for your time, and I wish you a buon viaggio. Ciao!